Chapter 51 Freeze. I woke up covered in snow with a massive headache. My body was sore like I had run a marathon the previous day as well. Took a moment to figure out why everything hurt, but the events of last night came back to me. Or this morning. I wasn't quite sure. Immediately, I pulled up my status. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, human, G. Class, G. Arctic Barbarian. Uncommon. Level 23. Profession, G. Novice Blacksmith. Common. Level 16. Faction, Zelensky family. Temporary. Strength, 148. Agility, 63. Perception, 17. Fortitude, 68. Endurance, 84. Vitality, 42. Intelligence, 16. Wisdom, 22. Acumen, 18. Free points, 0. Laws, least law of ice. Class skills, heavy blow, uncommon, fortified body common, throwing weapon proficiency, beginner, identify common, penetrating strike, common, sweeping slash, common, ice fortress, uncommon, heavy armor proficiency, beginner, heavy weapon proficiency, novice, body of a barbarian, uncommon, barbarian's rage, common, hail, common, ice manipulation, common, meditation, common, ice bolt, common, profession skills, sense metal, common, create weapon, crude, create armor, crude, metallurgy, common, coins, 0, points, 5,631. I did it. Manic laughter echoed off of the mountainside as the fruits of my labor were realized. Accomplishment and pride filled me, and I couldn't help but smile at my new status. No more blank lines and no more pesky nuns. I was ready to get my last few levels and evolve into the F rank without worry. Gaining a law had to have given me a few good options to choose from for my class. Maybe even a rare this time. As all of the previous day came back to me and my high of accomplishing what I came out here for fell away, I stared at the sun and realized what time it was. It was almost noon. Shit, I was supposed to already be on my way back right now. Without a second thought, I started packing up everything that I brought with me before in a hurry. As I started packing everything up, I noticed the warhammer made of ice leaning against my chair. The memories I had of last night were a bit fuzzy and I mistook making that as a dream. Seeing it now disillusioned me of that idea and made it real. It glistened in the morning sun and seemed to have an unnatural glow. This was the weapon I had been dreaming about. All the plans I had of making it came to fruition, only except for wood and metal it was ice. It looked perfect. I could only stare at it for a brief moment before I had to finish packing everything up. I could marvel at it more later. Since I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, I ran with dried meat in my mouth to get in a quick meal. It was nothing compared to the nice meals we had at camp, but it had to do. I couldn't tell the exact time it was from the position of the sun and had to pull up the tutorial timer to see how long I had. Tutorial end. 44:03:15:21. I had 3 hours and 15 minutes to make it back to camp before the wave started. There was no time for dallying. I would have to sprint the entire way home if I wanted to make it in time. Orienting toward the way back, I began my journey. I ran in a straight line toward the camp with no regard for running into any animals. If any started chasing me, I would have to ignore them. It took me about half a day to reach the mountains on my trip here, and that was with trying to be sneaky. There was no stealth involved now, pure speed. I used my strength to its fullest and pushed off the ground so hard it threw up dirt. Being fast was what agility usually covered, but having strength made my straight-line speed nearly as good. Turning would be impossible and stopping would be pretty difficult, but straight-away sprinting was doable. It was a matter of pushing off the ground with all the strength I could to carry me as fast as possible. Anxiety gripped me and I couldn't stop checking the timer. Tutorial end. 2 hours 4 minutes and 56 seconds. To make it easier to read, I blocked out the day counter. 2 hours 4 minutes and 56 seconds was my time to beat and an hour was already gone. The mountainous region was left behind and I entered into rolling hills. The hills fell away for forests before turning into grassland. Through it all I sprinted. Tutorial end. 45 hours 56 minutes and 2 seconds. As the minutes ticked down, a familiar area came into sight. Hills that matched what I knew from around camp and forest that looked familiar. I was getting close. The camp came into view with only 30 minutes to spare. I made it, completely out of breath and covered in sweat, but I made it. I would get to rest for only half an hour before the wave started, but I could only blame myself. Losing track of time was my own fault. As I entered the camp, everyone started to question why I was so late. They knew I was going on a trip, but I told them I would be back earlier than now. They were probably getting worried that something happened to me or that I wouldn't make it back in time. The verbal berating was annoying, but I dealt with it. I needed a quick rest before the fighting started. The waves lasted almost 2 hours now because of the amount of beasts, and after running full tilt for 3 hours I needed a breather. Austin came into my vision and gave me a questioning look. I told him what I was after, and he knew it was a law I went to the mountain for. Seeing his look, I responded with a grin and a nod. He just smirked and shook his head. Before I left, he told me I was crazy. Laws weren't a requirement for evolution, and it was a fool's dream to get one now. He said it wasn't possible. That'll show him. I would go in depth with him later and tell him how I did it to see if he could replicate it, but I doubted it. My feelings about what I did were instinct more than anything, and I wouldn't be a very good teacher about it. How do you instruct someone to follow their instincts and call it a day? I still knew very little about what I did, and I was the one who did it. All I had were vague feelings and gut instinct to guide me. I would still do my best to convey what I did in the most useful way I could, but he shouldn't get his expectations up. After everyone left me alone to catch my breath, I did something I needed to do before the wave started. I needed to test out this new law. Calling on it wasn't difficult, and it felt like it was constantly there, ready to be of use. It was like a phantom limb I didn't know I had. There was only one thing that it would work on around me, and that made it easy to tell what it did. The only ice around me at the time was my hammer. After feeling out the law, it seemed drawn to the hammer, and using it was similar to ice manipulation. I could empower my ice with it and make it stronger. It wasn't like a skill that required mana, but a purely mental aspect that I assumed ran on willpower. It was unlikely that invoking this power came without a cost, and mental strain or willpower were the only things that I could think of. Mana and the stamina energy weren't depleting, and nothing else seemed to be getting drained while I kept it active. I would find out after the fight. I didn't have the time to figure it out now. I only had 30 minutes to get as familiar with this new power as I could, and wasting it on testing that wasn't on my to-do list. After using it on already conjured ice, I tried to use it in the casting of hail. Instantly, I knew that the skill was stronger. The ice that formed from the skill carried with it the strength and durability of the law. Even with the ice empowered, the skill didn't upgrade. I felt that it was a stronger skill, but it was still in the common tier. I was missing something else that was crucial to the upgrade. The skill conjured ice in the area before dropping it onto the designated spot. Having more durable ice didn't fundamentally change the skill in the way a skill upgrade required. After using hail, I tried out my other skills. Ice Fortress felt sturdier compared to before and felt like it would hold up to more damage, but it similarly didn't increase in rarity. I tried to use the law on Fortified Body, but it didn't do anything. My body wasn't made of ice, so there was nothing for the law to latch onto. Similar things happened with the rest of my skills that didn't utilize ice. When Ice Bolt came up, something new happened. My mana was still completely pure ice mana, and with the law improving the skill, the bolt changed. Instead of the generic shape that it usually appeared as the ice shifted, it became more streamlined, and I could feel that the ice was more powerful. Launching the skill resulted in yet another change. It flew off into the trees with such force it shocked me. Ice Bolt usually shot with the force of something I could throw. This skill acted like it was getting shot out of a bow. A chime caught my attention, and I checked to see what it was. You have upgraded a skill. Ice Bolt. Common. Dash. Ice Arrow. Uncommon. I couldn't stop the grin that formed on my face, and I jumped to check the rest of my skills. Ice Manipulation didn't get changed that much and was kind of a letdown. It just carried the law with it to whatever I manipulated. Without any more ice skills to test, I turned to something different. Penetrating Strike. Common. Enhances the next strike with mana. increasing the ability to penetrate thick hide and armor. This was the skill that I passed on the chance to upgrade when I chose Barbarian's Rage. Frostbite was a great skill to have, and now it was something that I might be able to upgrade on my own. I drew upon the ice mana in my body and picked up my hammer to use the skill. I could use it on my fist, but it wasn't as strong. My hammer was made with ice and was still saturated with the ice mana used to make it. Walking over to a tree to use as a test dummy, I channeled the skill. Penetrating Strike started to activate, and I shoved all of the ice mana I could into the skill. Calling upon my law strengthened it further, and I was ready to swing. The main thing that I couldn't do to upgrade the skill was leave lasting damage. With the pure ice mana and the law to strengthen it, that shouldn't be a problem. I swung my hammer down onto the tree, and when it made contact, I shoved all of the built-up mana into the tree. I didn't swing very hard, as that wasn't the point. With my monstrous strength, I could have pulped the tree if I wanted to, but that wasn't what I was using it for. I needed a target I could eject mana into. My mana leaped to obey, and the constant practice paid off. It flowed out of my hammer and into the tree with little difficulty. First, it didn't do anything. The mana just sat there in the bark, being eroded by the wood and plant mana the tree already had. Something was missing. Calling out to it with ice manipulation, I gave it an intent. Mana just sitting there was no good to me. I needed it to hinder the tree. I needed it to freeze. Using my intent and my newly acquired law, I commanded the ice mana in the tree to freeze. Slight popping noises could be heard, and frost started to build up on the bark. The bark was freezing. I heard the chime and jumped to pull it up. You have upgraded a skill. Penetrating Strike. Common. Frostbite. Uncommon. Now I was ready. Whatever the 16th wave threw at us, I would kill it. Chapter 52 Storm Clouds. The 30 minutes of rest weren't enough to recover completely, but it was all the time I had available to me. Since the last wave came from the east and west, this one would come from the north and south. We split into the same groups as last time, with Jonathan and Austin to the south, and I would hold the north. I had Hal for my ranged support this time, and Rachel and Carrie were on the other side. There were a few more people up on the wall prepared to help, but it wasn't worth mentioning them. Alice would be the most helpful out of all of them, and that was only because she could supply me with ice. It felt bad to call them useless, but that was what they were turning into. Hell, Grandad was only level 18, and the beasts of the wave would be higher level than him. The class he evolved into, though, was helpful even with his low level. It was some kind of leadership class that boosted all of the warriors under him. Even though the boost was small, it was still worth it for most people. The difference in power between us made it not as effective on me. Overall, the boost was small, and my higher level only made it smaller. His class was a pleasant surprise, and one I didn't even know was a possibility. It wasn't outside the realm of possibility. Commander classes didn't seem that outlandish, but it was nice to have confirmation. I readied my new weapon, and I precast some hail before the wave started. Alice joined in and created a pile of ice for me to use. I didn't use hail too much, as I wished to start the battle at 100% mana, but enough to give me something to work with. The majority of the pile came from Alice. Her mana regeneration was higher than mine, and she could afford to use more of it now. Sitting in front of the wall, most of the stress and nerves from previous waves were gone. I didn't shake like the first wave, nor did I have sweat building up. It was just another day in the office. Having been through this 15 times gave me the needed experience to calm myself. I didn't have to worry about the wall and what happened in the 10th wave. In the back of my mind, the only thing I worried about the boss. They were showing increasing levels of intelligence. The last boss even started lobbing rocks at the wall. Ever since the 10th wave, where the monsters coordinated, it's only gotten worse. With enough points for the upgrade, everyone stood on a thick stone garrison of a wall that I wouldn't be able to get through. The gates were reinforced wood with metal bracing to give them added strength. It was starting to look more like a castle with every upgrade. First a wooden palisade, into a wooden wall, into stone. It even had parapets to use for cover. The wall matched the center building in that both were stone and had a sturdy feel to them. I made sure to give my new weapon a once-over before the battle. It wouldn't do to not familiarize myself with the weapon I was about to use. Even though I had made it, it was when I wasn't in complete control. I knew the weapon, I designed the weapon, but I hadn't used the weapon. Hammers and axes were two different instruments and they had to be used accordingly. Hammers had no blade and slicing attacks were meaningless. The hammerhead also had to hit square for the blow to be effective. Glancing blows with an axe still damaged with the cut of the blade, but hammers wouldn't damage as much as a solid hit. Also, I didn't know how sweeping slash would respond. It was a slashing attack that created a blade of mana. Would it still work without the blade to build off of? Testing the skill was odd. It felt like the mana wanted to create a blade, but something stopped it from completing. It instead created a rod that extended out from my hammer. It was like a less effective version of extended strike. That might be the first skill I would have to get rid of. It was sad and a waste of points that I bought the skill, but if it didn't work with my weapon it was useless. My spirit wasn't full, or whatever they call it when you can't take in any more skills, so I wouldn't get rid of it immediately. Maybe it would give me time to think about what to do with it. Think up an upgrade path to make it useful again. I wasn't sure if the time sink involved with that was worth it in the long run. I didn't get much time to continue the thought because an odd phenomenon stole my attention. The wave was starting and it seemed this one carried something different with it. Storm clouds began to form to the north. The timer was still counting down to the wave start, but already things were starting. My armor clinked as I made to stand and I hefted my new hammer. It was time for its debut. The wave started as thunder echoed out and lightning crackled. The clouds were making it hard to see and I almost called out to Kyle out of force of habit. I stopped myself in time, but it still stung. The sounds of thunder got closer and they were finally in range of identify. Thunder Tiger, level 22. Feelings of trepidation started blooming as I looked over the army of white and purple tigers charging toward me. Lightning sparked from tiger to tiger, building up in intensity before being discharged into the ground. These monsters leaned heavily into the elemental effects compared to all of the previous ones. The thought that their bodies would be weaker was comforting, but not that much as I saw the electrical storm running toward me. In the time before they arrived, I rushed to take off my armor. Wearing metal would only make it easier to electrocute me. I judged that wearing the armor would be more detrimental than beneficial. Putting it on was what took longer. Taking it off was easy. I threw it into a pile behind me and picked back up my hammer. The boss was still hidden, but I didn't rule it out from being on my side. As the distance closed, I started picking up the ice I had prepared. Ice manipulation and my law worked to empower it as it picked up speed. My snowflakes of death would be more powerful this time and less prone to shatter. Not one to be outdone, I met their charge with a mighty swing of my hammer. Instantly, I was in love. Even though I spent a lot of mana and time making it, I still harbored fears that it would break. It was ice after all. On my first swing, all of those fears faded away. It held firm after pulping a tiger's skull and showed zero signs of strain. It was even better than steel. If it was classified as a weapon, I think it would be in the common tier. A smile bloomed and I began my dance of death. Any tiger that came near me was flattened by my hammer, and any tiger that tried to get by me was sliced open with my blizzard. It was the best of both worlds. Ice that wouldn't break was a godsend. I settled in for a long battle and reveled in the feeling of a pitched battle. I noticed the feeling becoming more prominent the longer the tutorial went on. Something in me was coming alive after being dormant my whole life. It was like I was meant for battle. Without armor, I had to be more defensive with my swings, but I still had the time to obliterate my foes. They were quick and their lightning affinity only made them quicker, but a blow from my hammer was enough to kill them. Lightning washed over my flesh and forced my muscles to contract, but I powered through it. My strength was my strong suit and I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. I debated activating Barbarian's Rage for the reduction in pain and boost in stats, but thought better of it. I still didn't know where the boss was, and activating it now would be premature. Shouting and orders sang out from the wall, but none of that concerned me. Granddad had skills that worked through the orders that he was using, but they weren't directed at me. It would be a waste of mana to give me the small boost his skills gave. Bodies piled up and blood saturated the ground. The soil could only soak up so much of it, and what was left splashed with every footfall. It didn't take long for it to soak into my boots. Fuck, Sam's gonna have to make me another pair. The number of boots I had destroyed was silly. If I used my strength wrong while wearing them, destroyed boots. Getting into a fight and having them sliced open, destroyed boots. Getting them soaked in blood that wouldn't come out, destroyed boots. At this point, Sam had spares of my size ready for when I inevitably came back for more. Getting blood out of them was impossible. They stunk and were just nasty to walk in. Making them out of metal wasn't worth the trouble. Cleanse could only do so much for the blood, and I usually forgot about them after the battle. It wouldn't be until the next day that I got them cleaned, and by then, the blood had dried and set in. Having stray thoughts like that was becoming increasingly common. The cannon fodder of the wave didn't get me worked up like it used to. After fighting the boss of the last wave, these things were nothing. G-ranked beasts without a law to back them up fell quicker than the notifications could chime. Some turned off the chime mid-battle so it wouldn't distract them, but it was music to my ears. Every chime was a monster dead. Grunting through yet another lightning attack, my body started to seize up. Nothing could last forever, and their numbers finally overpowered my body. The frenzy the tigers went in when they thought they were about to win was comical. Barbarian's rage activated, and anger flushed through my body, dulling the pain and giving me control of my muscles back. It was annoying to have to use it so soon, but I would be in trouble if I let them keep electrocuting me. Their claws and teeth were annoying as well. I had the strength to ignore most of it, but everything built up over time. A second wind took over and the status quo remained. A man standing strong and tigers dying in droves. The wave was about half over and the boss had yet to show itself. It might be using the storm clouds to hide itself. If that were true, that displayed a level of intelligence I didn't like. The tigers weren't entirely ineffective in their attacks. The lightning was building up again after being purged with rage, and claws sank into skin. Forgoing armor was the right decision, but it left my skin to bear the brunt of attack. Their swipes were more swift than powerful, but still drew bloody lines over my body. Blood soaked my clothes and covered my skin from all the cuts. Fortitude worked to lessen the damage, and fortified body added in that effort, but they were still level 22 beasts. At the start, I protected myself with ice to try and reduce the damage, but they clawed through that quickly. When it got too bad and my body threatened to seize up, Ice Fortress gave me the needed reprieve. It was thicker than ice wall, and I could use it to surround me rather than just one side. It gave me the needed breather to let all of the lightning discharge out of me and get me ready to get back into it. Throughout it all was my hammer. It was quickly becoming close to me and was covered in blood. Barely any of the blue glow it had could be seen from the thick layer of blood dripping off of it. While I rested, the tigers tried to claw through my ice but found little success. My uncommon skill, aided by my law, made it hard to get through. Their claws chipped at it and shaved some off, but it wasn't nearly enough to get through the thick wall separating us. Even encased in ice, I used ice manipulation to continue the slaughter. The battle fever was on its way down and the beasts were thinning, and still, the boss had yet to appear. I was beginning to think it was on the other side. Arrows flew in from the wall, and while I was protected in ice, the ranged attackers used that opportunity to use their area of effect skills. If the monsters of the wave couldn't get through my ice, neither could they. Ice Fortress had a less strict activation shape, and I could use it to cover every direction I could get attacked from. While resting, I saw a bright light from the wall being launched in my direction. A ginormous fireball exploded on impact not 10 feet away from me, burning and injuring everything nearby. It only could have come from Rachel, but she was supposed to be on the other side. Why was she over here? The only reason they would come over to my side would be because their side was finished. Where was the boss? It should be SH. Crack. Boom. At that moment, a thunderous boom rocked the earth and a lightning bolt shot through the air. It originated from the clouds that had gathered during the wave, and the thick bolt of lightning headed toward us. The lightning bolt was nothing like the tigers of the wave produced and could only have come from the boss. Thicker than my arm, and it carried the power of an uncommon skill, maybe more. I started to build up some ice to defend myself but stopped. The bolt wasn't headed for me. It was headed toward the wall. As soon as I realized that I wasn't the target, I tried to send ice into the bolt's path to block it. I was too slow. It tore through the air faster than I could send ice to block it. Mana shields snapped into place from members on the wall, but the bolt smashed through them. The shields did little to hinder the bolt, and it continued on its journey. Time seemed to slow as I saw the bolt inch closer toward its target. My breathing quickened and my heart pounded. No, this wasn't happening. At the end of its trajectory stood its target. A man with a spear shouting orders at his family. An older man with gray hair covering his head. A gentle soul who loved his family and did everything he could to help them succeed. The bolt hit and I couldn't look away. Skin blackened. Smoke wafted into the air and the body spasmed. A man of over 80 years tried to dodge but did little to get out of the way. The bolt found its target and fried him to the core. A hole the size of my fist pierced through his chest and blood poured from the wound. All I could do was watch as his body realized it was dying. Knees buckled and he fell to where I couldn't see him anymore. The wall blocked my view. I knew deep down what happened. I knew there wasn't a way to survive that. The boss took out what it saw as the leader. Knew. It was futile. My screams were meaningless. With Barbarian's rage already active, I let the anger take over. I left my fortress behind and charged toward where the bolt originated from. It was going to die. Chapter 53 Vengeance. Vengeance was the only thing I could think about as I charged to where the boss had to be. There was nothing I could do for my grandfather, but there was something I could do for the beast that killed him. I would either kill it or die trying. I ignored the lesser tigers that were still left from the wave. They were of no consequence anymore. Their attacks brushed off me as I ran past. Getting closer to where the storm clouds peaked in concentration revealed the boss in all its glory. Over double the size of the regular tigers, it stood at just over 6 feet tall. Smaller than the boss lizard from the last wave but still large for a tiger. This one was built more for speed and its smaller size would aid it. I didn't slow my charge and ran straight at it. The boss dodged my swing easily and charged up another lightning bolt that it sent at me. This one wasn't as powerful as the bolt earlier and did little to deter me. After a few fruitless swings, I realized that there was no way I was going to be able to catch it in the open field we were in. My swings only hit air and the boss was faster than I could catch. Fine, if you want to be like that. Instead of chasing it around meaninglessly, I went for a different avenue of approach. Took a decent chunk of my mana, but it was worth it. A massive ice fortress froze into place around the boss before it could get away. It was the largest creation I had made with the skill, and it took the mana to prove it. It didn't wish to be so large, but my will prevailed. I wasn't going to let the limitations of the skill stop me. Easily 4 times as expensive as the little huts I was making with it earlier, and a mental strain unlike any other didn't bother me. It was what I needed, so I would make it so. I trapped it in a cage of ice with only myself inside. I had isolated it for a one-on-one fight. Given time, the boss would have been able to break out, but that wasn't a problem it was worrying about currently. It had to defend against the angry barbarian charging at it. It was a gamble on my part. A sort of death match where only one of us would get out of this icy cage, and I wasn't 100% sure it would be me. Vengeance was a strong motivator, but it also had the capacity to force you into stupid decisions. None of that was on my mind at the moment. The only thing I was concerned with was killing this thing. With the upgrades to my strength since the last wave and the upgraded skills that I had, fighting the boss of the last wave wouldn't have been as hard as it was. Taking the blows would have been doable with my law and strengthened ice, but killing it was another matter. Getting through its natural defenses of the lizard boss would have been tough, and I wasn't certain I had the mana capacity to both defend and get through the armor. Trapping that thing in here with me would have been a death wish. This boss, though, was a different story. It didn't have the monstrous strength that the lizard had, and it would be easier to kill. I only needed to catch it. Now that both of us were in an enclosed space, the tiger had less room to evade me. It also gave it an easier time attacking me, but I wasn't dodging those to begin with. Dodging was futile and would be a waste of time. I wasn't fast enough. Time would be the deciding factor of who would win. Would the lightning build up fast enough to kill me before I landed the killing blow? Or would I get to it first? The boss frantically shot out bolts of lightning that were only slightly more powerful than the lesser tigers. It didn't have the time to build up the massive bolt it shot out before, and there was no way I was going to give it time. It did not like me closing in on it and did everything it could to ward me off. It leaped and pounced around my imposed cage with the grace only a feline had. Eating lightning bolts to the face was painful, but not painful enough to make me stop. The initial size of the ice fortress I cast was big enough to account for any movement the boss made before it finished freezing to catch it if it attempted to flee. Now that it was trapped, I worked to start constricting the place further. Like a vice slowly clamping down until there was nowhere to go. Ice built upon what was already there to trap it further. My body rocked with muscle spasms and my skin started to blacken on repeated hits from the lightning. But I pushed through, taking more space away from the beast. As the walls closed in, the boss realized what was going to happen. In its too intelligent eyes, it saw the outcome of letting me trap it. To not let that happen, it went on the offensive. Before, it was skirting around me and peppering me with lightning attacks trying to wear me down from the edges of the cage. Now, it used everything it had. Claws, teeth, magic, everything at its disposal to stop me. It engaged in a brutal melee where I came out worse off. Blood flowed freely from my wounds and some of my hair melted off from a magic attack. Any retaliatory attack I tried to make met air instead of the flesh I sought. The dance continued and I was losing. My attacks meant nothing if I couldn't land them and the wounds started to add up. My muscles usurped control from me and started not to listen to my commands. My movements slowed from the wounds and blood loss. Still, not once did I feel despair. All I needed was one shot and the time for that shot was coming soon. I just needed to hold out a little longer. I needed to remain on my feet a bit more. In the boss's mad dash to kill me, its attention shifted to me instead of the walls. That was a mistake. Another claw came flying in, carving another line through my torso, and I couldn't help but smile. The tiger went to jump away after getting its swipe in and ran face first into my ice. It was stunned. It had expected to be able to leap away before I could counterattack. It was wrong. Knowing what was coming, I was ready to pounce on the opening that was created, powering up my hammer with everything I could to make it count. Heavy blow slotted with frostbite to make this my first attack with two uncommon skills stacked into one blow. I pushed with my law as hard as I could and even activated ice manipulation to make sure that my hammer could take it. It was sturdy and fighting with it proved its effectiveness, but this would be the absolute worst time for it to fail. If my mind had been clearer, I would have realized that this was the first time I had 5 skills active. The 3 above coupled with rage and fortified body. Ice Fortress didn't count because I wasn't using it anymore. I could see the fear in its eyes as it watched my weapon start to descend. Lightning flowed across its fur in an attempt to defend, but it was too slow to build up to anything useful in defending. It took time to manifest, time it did not have. As sure as the sun rose in the sky, my hammer fell on its head, an inevitable outcome that no amount of effort would change. I used all of my strength to make sure that this would be no glancing blow. It would land and it would hurt. The tiger twisted and strained to get out of the way, but it couldn't in time. All of its speed, reduced to nothing if there wasn't room to evade. It managed to get its head out of the way, but that only made me hit its shoulder. The blow connected, brushing off the pitiful lightning defense, and I could hear bone breaking, flesh squelching. The mid-leap tiger took my blow before being launched across the cage, skipping on the ground before slamming into the wall opposite me. Blood spattered everywhere it hit, dyeing the ground red. It flipped over itself from the force of the blow and landed on its back. It yowled in pain before getting back on its feet. It righted itself in a way only a cat could, but it wasn't the same as before. Frost built up on its fur where my blow landed and its right paw was dragging on the ground. The shoulder joint broken made it useless. I could feel my ice mana in the wound penetrating the flesh and slowing its movements. Well, the leg was broken, it didn't matter if it was slow, it couldn't move, but it spread nonetheless. Surprisingly, there was little blood. The blunt force from my hammer transferred into the beast without breaking the skin that much like my axe would have. Seeing little blood didn't deter me. The loss of its leg was proof enough of the strength of my attack. Effectively crippled, it made it easy to land another blow. This one less accurate than before and landed in its midsection. A fractured rib and my ice mana the only consequence. It landed the occasional blow on me, but I was like a shark smelling dinner. Seeing it brought low was enough motivation to push through the pain. I was a man of my word and I said it would die. The boss got increasingly frantic as the blows continued to land. One on its hind quarters as it attempted to jump away, another on its back, another on its front leg. Every blow built up the ice mana in the boss and it began to slow. The damage over time aspect of Frostbite showed its worth. In all of its accursed intelligence, it knew it was about to die. Maybe not this blow, maybe not the next, but it would die. In all the twisted thoughts it could have had, what it did never occurred to me as an option. I felt the static in the air build up and the lightning thicken on its fur. I thought it would try for one last attack and use everything it could. To stop it from doing that, I launched myself at it with the same intent. I brought my hammer to bear, but I wasn't ready for what came next. The lightning built up faster than before, and it was stronger than even its opening attack. If it could have done that, why did it wait so long? I braced for the bolt I was sure to come while continuing my swing. Something's off. The build-up wasn't slowing down. Kept gathering, kept increasing. Building on each other to increase further. At the last second, I saw a look of satisfaction in its eye. What does it have to be satisfied? Lightning poured out of the boss in one final explosion. It was blowing itself up to take me with it. Instantly, I abandoned my attack. There wasn't enough time to create distance, so I did the only thing I could do. Ice Fortress worked in tandem with ice manipulation to build walls between me and the coming explosion. I ripped ice from the cage I created and built upon the wall from Ice Fortress. I used the maximum thickness I could on the skill and packed in more to make it thicker. Urging the ice to freeze faster, I could only watch the beast's body fall apart. The power was too much to handle and it was starting to destabilize. Chapter 54. Changes. I woke to a sharp pain in my face. Immediately, I jumped up and surveyed for threats in the room but only found Austin. As my mind came more into focus, I found out that 1, he had slapped me, and 2, my body was not in a condition to be making sudden movements. Ow, what the hell was that for? I said while rubbing my face. You needed to wake up and shaking didn't work. It was either that or water, and I didn't feel like getting water. Austin said with a shrug of his shoulders. Like it was completely natural. Why am I being hit in the first place? He could have let me sleep off the pain from the fight at least. Felt like some healing was done, but not a lot. You need to be awake to use meditation, he replied. Darn. He was right, keeping that skill active would help the most for my recovery. If it wasn't for a good reason, I was going to hit him back. Being healed in my sleep sounded better because there wasn't any pain to be felt, but this was better. I couldn't afford to spend all day in bed. Some things needed to be done, and the sooner they were, the better. I didn't even ask about Granddad. I saw the wound, and there was no coming back from that. Without anything else to say, I started up meditation to speed up my recovery. It was about an hour after the fight that Austin woke me up based on the sun, and a few more of using meditation and healing before I was up and walking around. I would use it more tonight to finish the job, but it was good enough for now. I had scars from the lightning covering my body along with white lines from where the boss took artistic liberty with my body. At this point, my body was more scar than skin. There had to be a way to get rid of them or else everyone in the multiverse would be covered in scars. Maybe evolution did the trick. Or maybe we just didn't have healers skilled enough. I didn't dwell on that too much. There was nothing I could do about it now, and there were other things to do. Most of the cleanup was done during the time I was recovering. Fighting the boss away from where we had to fix the damage had its advantages. That left time just before sundown for another task that needed doing. A box was made and we started our procession to the hill. I didn't have the sadness of the first time we did this, nor the anger of the second. I was just numb. I made great lengths in my personal power and still this happened. I could fight the boss solo and still we were here. It wasn't anger that filled me anymore. It was hopelessness. It felt like we were destined to fail and I would watch as my family slowly died. I could be as powerful as ever, but it still wouldn't be enough. Anyone who fought on the battlefield had a chance of dying and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I could sequester all of them into the bunker and fight the wave alone, but that would end in my death. There were things that needed to change. Now wasn't the time to start. I would wait until the morning. Now was the time to say goodbye. I didn't stay on the hill long. It just made me sad. Grandma took it the hardest and took the longest before leaving. Dinner was subdued and I spent the night in meditation. It wasn't an alternative to sleep, but I could go one night without. Before breakfast, at the time Austin and I usually left to hunt, I found Abigail. She was doing her best to keep everything together, and with Granddad dead, she was who everyone turned to for direction. I need everyone to gather before we start the day. I didn't say why and she didn't ask. It was like she was running on autopilot and answering was outside of her coding right now. All I got back was a nod before she started fussing over breakfast. She had a habit of forcing herself to stay busy to avoid the pain. I didn't have time for that right now, but I made a note to speak with her later. Austin found me soon after. He must be wondering why we weren't leaving. I stayed in the middle of camp while he walked toward me. "Hey, what's the hold-up?" Austin asked. "Things need to change," I answered. My tone made him understand that this was serious. After a lot of thought over the night, I came up with a solution. People would hate me for it, but that wasn't a concern right now. They could only hate me if they were alive, and that I was fine with. Austin gave me a questioning look. "I hope you do not fight me on this." I didn't want to alienate him, but we needed to switch what we were doing because it wasn't working. After Derek, I resolved myself to get strong enough to protect my family. After Mark and Kyle, I thought I did the best I could, and the reason was because the wall failed. After Granddad, it was different. I realized no matter how strong I got, it wouldn't matter. I came up with a plan to change that. Everyone would now go into the forest to fight. Everyone would need to get stronger and there would be no more slackers. Harsh as it was necessary. It was going supernova. I redoubled my effort and used every ounce of willpower to strengthen my defense with my law. My mana ran dry in my effort before a curtain of white covered my eyes and a massive force rocked me. I could hear ice shattering in the background, but the only thing I could focus on was the pain. My body spasmed as lighting ran its course through it, singing painful arcs over my body. My hair burnt off before my skin blackened. The only reason I wasn't killed instantly was because the explosion was omnidirectional. If it had been a targeted attack, I would have been vaporized. The fortress enclosing us shattered from the force and I fell back onto the ground. Total loss of motor function made my body fall with little grace. More like a puppet with its strings cut. It was in a twitching heap and painful spasms that I caught movement in my vision. White spots still clouded it, but it cleared enough to see something coming. Something glowing. My very own nightlight coming to save me. I let out a light laugh that only came out as a groan before everything went dark. Austin was receptive to the plan but wasn't thrilled. He questioned what we would do with people who refused. Refusal isn't an option. This would be the part they hated me for. If taken out of context, it would seem I turned into this crazed dictator who ordered his family around. But that wasn't the way I saw it. I was doing the only thing I could think of to keep them safe. This plan was the best I had to get as many people out of this thing alive. If they hated me for it, so be it. Now, I wouldn't be sending them to their deaths, that would be pointless. I would split them into groups and have one of the stronger people in camp escort them. Austin, Rachel, Hal, Carrie, and Jonathan were strong enough to keep a group of 4 or 5 safe in the forest, and I could do it easily. The plan was simple, really forced advancement. With a member to keep them safe, the fights wouldn't be dangerous and they would level up from the experience. Higher levels meant more survivability and less chance of having to dig another grave. We would rotate who went so there would always be someone in camp to protect it and also watch the kids. Half would do their training in the morning and half would go in the afternoon. While they were in camp, they had the option of working on their profession or training in other ways. After telling Austin the extent of my plan, he took a minute to think. I don't think this is going to go over very well, he said. I know it won't, but it's the best I can do. I replied, can I count on your support? If he wanted to fight me on this, there wasn't much I could do. We needed a new faction head, and I wasn't going to challenge him over it. If he wanted the job, I would give it to him. Fighting each other now would be worse than doing nothing. Austin nodded. I got your back. After our talk, people started to gather for breakfast. I waited until everyone was seated and eating before I started. I stood and managed to get everyone's attention. I know this feels fast, but we need to talk about it. A new faction head needs to be chosen. I announced. It was a notification that everyone had received. A new leader needed to be chosen after ours had fallen. It felt wrong to move on so fast after we put him in the ground yesterday. But this needed to be done. There were grumblings about that very fact, but I pushed on. Austin and I already talked it out, and we think it should be me, I added. I could have gone into the reasons why, but it seemed unnecessary. It was between me and Austin, and he didn't want it. As there always was, people disagreed. They wanted Abigail or Grandma to be the next head. Luckily, they had the good sense to decline. After their would-be nominees declined the opportunity, it left only me. Becoming the faction leader was only the first part of my plan, and with that accomplished, I moved on to the second part. Now, with that out of the way, there are going to be some changes. I know you have realized the waves are only going to get harder, and, on average, we are not keeping pace. There are a few of us who are, but we are the minority. If we are to survive, changes need to be made. With that said, I have thought up a plan that I think will work the best. I have written down groups of people who I think would form a decent party together and who would be their escort. Everyone needs to level up so we can all make it out of this alive. I wasn't the best at speeches, and telling a room full of people that they needed to go fight monsters went over as well as expected. Yelling and name-calling were the loudest, while most just nodded. They must have come to the same conclusion. Previously, some people attempted to hunt like Austin and I did, and now it was mandatory. People called me callous of taking over so soon after Granddad died. I let all of it wash over me. I knew they would be angry and some would lash out. There were questions, and I did my best to answer them. Team composition was questioned, and I did my best to convey my opinion. We had 10 warriors, 3 rogues, 2 rangers, 4 healers, and 7 mages all totaled up. Taking out who would be escorts left 7 warriors, 3 rogues, 4 healers, and 6 mages. Splitting into 4 groups of 5 made the most tactical sense, so every group had a healer. Video game party compositions came into play, and people were separated by class. I tried to keep immediate family together when applicable. Alice and Jack were easy to keep together since one was ranged and another melee. Sam and Ashley had to be separated because of them both being healers. Some people were unhappy about it, but there was little I could do. It didn't make sense to have a party of 3 warriors, a rogue, and a healer. There were 6 escorts to only 4 groups, so that gave all of us time to work on ourselves. I knew Austin wanted to try for a law now that I had one, and this gave him time to do that. We would rotate who would escort. 2 groups would go out in the morning and 2 groups in the afternoon. Only 4 people needed to be an escort on any given day, leaving 2 people free. It would cut into the time I spent training, and we would have to lose some sleep if we wanted to keep our hunting schedule going. But it wouldn't be that bad. A month and a half. That was what we were aiming for. All we had to do was survive 45 more days. I could rest when this was over. With the immediate problem out of the way, I focused on something else. My battle notifications. You have slain Thunder Tiger. Level 22. 484 points earned. You have slain Thunder Tiger. Level 23. 529 points earned. You have slain Greater Thunder Tiger. Level 26. 676 points earned. You have successfully defended your claim. Extra experience awarded. 4,840 points to all who participated. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Skills available. I smiled at the 2 level-ups. Fighting the boss solo had its perks, and I was ready to evolve. I was hoping for a rare class. Chapter 55 F rank. Decisions, decisions. The first thing I had to do was choose my last class skill. Looking back on the list of 9 that my current class offered me was bittersweet. There were 3 I didn't have and I could only choose one. Ice manipulation, common. Body of a barbarian, uncommon. Piercing cold, uncommon. Shatter, uncommon. Hail, common. Barbarian's rage, common. Frostbite, uncommon. Ice bolt, common. Wind chill, common. The 3 I didn't have were wind chill, common. Piercing cold, uncommon. Shatter, uncommon. I dismissed wind chill because it focused more on debuffing an enemy rather than empowering me. It also leaned more on wind than ice, and my new law would do little with the skill. Piercing cold was similar to ice bolt. It summoned a spear of ice that left afflictions on whatever it hit. Similar to frostbite in a way, but more toward the slowing aspect of the cold. I wasn't in need of another magic skill right now, and Ice Arrow worked fine right now anyway. Maybe it was because I really wanted Shatter that I easily got rid of the other 2. Ever since the list came out, I knew I wanted Shatter. It would work well with all of my current ice skills, and my law fit in with it perfectly. The law-empowered ice would explode more violently because more force would be needed and the shards would be better weapons. I could see uses for all 3 of the skills, but Shatter was the one my heart was set on. Its description was plain, but it didn't need to be flowery. Using it, I could target ice and make it explode. It was self-explanatory. With my final skill slotted, my class evolution came up. Class evolution available. Not one to waste time, I pulled it up. 5 classes stared back at me. 1 uncommon and 4 rare. I had hoped for a rare option, and now I had the choice between 4 of them. It seemed epic was still out of reach. If I hadn't blazed through the ranks in under a month, I might have been able to get enough achievements to get one. Rare was still good though, and I was satisfied with it. It did make me wonder what an epic class would need though. The uncommon was easily dismissed, and I didn't look much farther into it than the name. Warrior of Ice sounded cool, but it was dumb to go for the lower rarity when better were available. The only way that would happen was if the next 4 were so bad the increase wasn't worth it. I severely doubted that happening though. I did take note of how many stat points were offered for it though. The uncommon class gave 20 stat points per level, which was a sharp increase from the 10 I got now. The first rare was Arctic Barbarian Chieftain. It seemed to be a direct upgrade to my current class and built more into the barbarian side of things. I wasn't beholden to being a barbarian, so that wasn't a deal breaker for me, but I also wasn't against it. The next class I almost wanted to dismiss immediately. Village Leader. Seeing its description made me fairly certain Grandad had a lesser version of this class. It was focused on leadership abilities and commanding people. The only reason I could think of that this class was offered was because of my new faction head position. Barbarian Chieftain would probably have a few leadership skills as well. I didn't know that taking on the position would give me a class option for it. It made sense that it would, but it wasn't on the top of my mind when I became the leader. I had no desire to take the class. After reading through all of them, it was 2 that I narrowed it down to. Champion of Niflheim, rare. Warriors of Niflheim are known for their battle prowess and their magics of cold, turning any environment to their advantage and creating weapons and armor of their element. Fierce warriors who thrive in the cold. Only the foolish or arrogant meet them in battle in the winter. Requirements. Some form of ice affinity, least law of ice, display of strength, fighting a higher tier monster solo. +6 strength, +3 agility, +2 perception, +4 fortitude, +2 endurance, +2 vitality, +5 free. Child of Winter, rare. Weapons, magics, or rituals, none are outside their scope. Turns vast swaths of land into places of ice and cold. Competent in various forms of combat without being beholden to one. Craft domains that few will easily enter and only the lucky will ever leave. This class starts you on that path of power. Requirements. Some form of ice affinity, least law of ice. +2 strength, +2 agility, +2 perception, +2 fortitude, +2 endurance, +2 vitality, +2 intelligence, +2 wisdom, +2 acumen, +6 free. Came down to what I wanted for the future. One would keep me a warrior and the other a jack of all. 2 in every stat point was tempting, but it wouldn't let me excel in any. It also turned me into an all-rounder in terms of combat. I liked being a warrior, and I liked being in the thick of battle with my hammer. Child of Winter would take that away. It would make me too diverse, and I wouldn't really excel in any form of combat, turning me purely defensive and only powerful inside the domain it could craft. I was a warrior first, and I wanted to keep it that way. Seeing a class about Niflheim was a shock. It made it possible that it was real. A realm of ice and cold from Norse mythology out there somewhere. It certainly wasn't outside the realm of possibility now that the system arrived. It made me wonder how many more legends were actually real. Was there Zeus out there somewhere slinging lightning bolts and having way too many kids? It made me chuckle thinking about it. Deep down I knew which one I was going to choose, but I wanted to give the choice the consideration it was due. Making a hasty decision now would affect every evolution to come, and hopefully, there would be a lot. Child of Winter would certainly be the better choice for the situation I found myself currently, but did I want to sacrifice my future for the present? No, I did not. It would be harder to protect everyone with Champion of Niflheim, but it would be worth it. I had to think about what was to come when we got out of this tutorial, and stunting my choice now wouldn't be good. With my choice made, I felt the change happen. It happened the same as last time, and no level was given. It was the racial improvements that worked their way through my body. It felt like all of my stat points meant a little more. I had to look at my stat sheet to find out how many stat points the evolution gave me. The racial evolution to G rank gave 2 points in every stat, along with more subtle improvements as well. The evolution to F rank gave 5 in every stat, and it felt even better than getting to G rank. I was curious to see what skill I was given from my class, but there wasn't one. The last skill on my list was Shatter, which I just got a few moments ago. My mind whirled through all of the possibilities and of the option that I wouldn't get one. It was in my confusion that I felt something different. It was like a choice was pending and needed an answer. It had no descriptions and gave no skill names, only vague feelings. There were 2 options, and after feeling them out a little more, I understood what they implied. One side was an assortment of weapons, the other, armor. It was asking me to choose, weapon or armor. Seeing how my hammer held up fine and my armor constantly got destroyed, I went with armor. After I made my choice, my new skill appeared on the list. Frost Armor, rare. Create a layer of ice and frost to cover the body in armor. Durability is determined by endurance and fortitude and can benefit from armor-associated skills. I could now make my very own armor out of ice and had my first rare skill. Having it tied to my endurance and fortitude was another bonus, since they were my second and third highest stats. It would have been unfortunate to have it tied to my magical abilities and the lack thereof. Giving it a quick test produced incredible results. I created ice with hail, and activated the skill, which resulted in the ice not even being needed. The skill created its own. It felt odd to have ice start to freeze all over your body, but it wasn't painful. A thick layer of ice formed all over me before working to smooth out the edges. Joints were shaved down to articulate better. Limbs were formed with ease of movement in mind. The breastplate thickened to provide better protection. It was like having full-plate armor mold to my specific measurements, and it fit like a glove. There weren't any adjustments I had to make to it like my metal armor, and there wasn't any pinching. Everything flowed with my movement and felt perfect. I picked up my hammer for a few test swings, and it felt amazing. The weapon of ice felt perfect in my hand, and any skill flowed easier into it. My armor normally caused a slight delay in mana transfer or hindered it in other ways, but this skill had none of that. All of it was ice and melded together seamlessly to provide swift movement and mana transfer. It would be perfect. Testing out my law to strengthen it worked just as easily. The rare skill aided by the law was stronger than steel, and if it were an item would easily be in the common tier. It took a surprising amount of effort to keep the law active on all of the ice though, which was the only downside to an otherwise perfect skill. Seeing how it was the perfect skill, it made me excited to see what the class had in store for the future. Looking at my status, I couldn't help but be giddy. Name: Christopher Zelensky. Race: Human. F. Class: F. Champion of Niflheim. Rare: Level 25. Profession: G. Novice Blacksmith. Common. Level 16. Finity. Ice. Faction. Zelensky family. Temporary. Faction head. Strength. 164. Agility 72. Perception 22. Fortitude 77. Endurance 94. Vitality 50. Intelligence 22. Wisdom 28. Acumen 24. Free points 0. Laws. Least law of ice. Class skills. Boiler. Profession skills. Sense metal. Common. Create weapon. Crude. Create armor. Crude. Metallurgy. Common. Coins 0. Points 17,234. My stats were improving and my skill list was getting even more out of hand. I was on my way to having enough points for the skill I was waiting for. Mana engraving would help push my blacksmith profession more toward enchanting like I wanted it to. It would be silly to have a class and profession that both focused on strength as the main stat, and I wanted to use my profession to shore up some of my lagging stats. Enchanting was a magic-heavy profession and should lean more into the magic side that I currently was behind in. It also had the added benefit of being dexterity-heavy with fine, precise movements needed for rune etching. If the stat points focused on agility and wisdom as the main focus, it would be perfect. It would complement my strength-heavy class with the added agility and give me enough mana to create giant works of ice while fighting. Thinking about blacksmithing brought up a question I needed to check out. Would my new skill work over my armor? It fit over my clothes just fine and didn't have any problems with it. If it fit over my armor, I would have even better protection. Trying it out led to less than stellar results. It worked, but it had things that needed improvement. Layering my armor of ice on top of plate metal led to some unwieldy armor. It was entirely too thick and insanely cumbersome to move in. If my heavy armor proficiency skill was higher, then it might work, but as it was now, it was unacceptable. Not one to give up so easily, I brainstormed some changes I could make to improve the design. Thin out the metal to reduce thickness along with getting rid of anything at the joints. The ice was strong enough to protect my joints by itself, and I only really needed the vitals protected in metal. Oh, the things I can make. I couldn't wait for the next wave to test it thoroughly. Chapter 56. Tracy. Tracy Strong's POV. I didn't know if I could take much more of this. Everyone in this camp was an utter moron. Whining about this or whining about that. It was enough to drive a woman mad, and I was nearly at my breaking point. Carrying them through this tutorial was turning out harder than I anticipated. They fought me at every little decision and made me want to strangle them. It got so bad I got fed up and snapped. I didn't mean to be quite so forceful, but it got the point across. No one spouted any unnecessary objections after that. In my defense, I didn't know how powerful the relic was going to be when I bought it from the store. The man lived, and after extensive time with healers, had no permanent damage. Thinking about it still made me cringe. I had just wanted to chastise the man, not hurt him that badly. I cleared my head of those thoughts. There was nothing that I could do about it now. The next wave was coming tomorrow, and I had to prepare for it. Always preparing, always doing as much as possible, all to see it destroyed in 3 days. It was sad to spend every waking moment putting your all into defending the camp for all of it to be in ruins not 3 days later. I had to do it though, otherwise we would all die. Starting as a ranger had been strange in this new world. Getting taken out of my life so suddenly and forced to choose between 5 classes like this was some video game. It was fairly easy to narrow down my decision to ranger though. There was no chance in hell I was going to swing around a sword or use daggers, so warrior and rogue were out. I wanted to stay as far away from the monsters as I could. Thank you very much. I needed to be able to defend myself, and I had never been good with the sight of blood, which eliminated healer. It came down to mage and ranger. Both would give me the range I sought, but one was something I knew a little about and the other was completely new. Familiarity won out in the end, and I picked ranger. I wasn't a ranger anymore, and I could have probably gotten to my current class through mage, but it would have been more difficult. Arcane Trapper had a nice ring to it that made it sound cooler than it actually was. After choosing my class and getting dropped off into this never-ending hell, I knew that I had to change. It was just like a tower defense game, and I had to treat it like such. Traps and defenses meant more than having an extra warrior on the wall, so that was what I did. Evolving into Trapper had been the logical choice. It gave me the needed skills to help the best way I could without actually having to fight. Pitfall, spike, even poison. Every new skill came with another trap I could make. It all ran on mana though, which was the only hindrance. To make a trap, I needed two things, the materials and the mana to use the skill. I could make a trap manually, obviously, but my skills were there for a reason and added greatly to the lethality of my traps. Mundane traps stopped being effective long ago. I had the points for materials, it was the mana that limited how many I could place. Starting as a ranger had most of my points go into perception and agility, which didn't help me much now. Trapper evened it out with a touch of the magic stats along with more perception and agility. In my eyes, a profession would even it out. I needed a profession to focus on the magical stats that I was missing, either wisdom or acumen. Intelligence wouldn't help with the amount of traps I could place, it would only make the ones I do place stronger. Enchanter was the obvious choice. It focused on wisdom and acumen, so I had more mana and recovered it faster along with the added bonus of aiding my trap making. Magical components and triggers I could now craft at a fraction of the price. It certainly alleviated the points I dumped into the store. Points were where all the arguments started. After being pulled in here with a bunch of my college classmates, none of them took this seriously enough. They treated it like a game and fought each other over kill stealing and fighting too close to each other and splitting experience. Things I would hear my little brother yell about on his Xbox. Our faction head was the charismatic cliché frat boy who thought just because he was the loudest that made him the smartest. His rules were stupid and didn't care about what anyone did as long as he got a share. He let everyone choose whatever profession they wanted without even considering what would be useful. We still didn't have a leatherworker because no one wanted to work with the nasty chemicals. Watching him die brought a small amount of joy. No one paid attention to little old Tracy. They saw me as a small weak little girl who posed no danger. That all changed when I nearly killed Jacob. I still got looks when I walked through camp, and they would all find something else more interesting when I looked their way. While they were fighting each other and spending points on frivolous things, I was getting stronger. Small and weak traps placed absolutely everywhere made me a contributor in almost every death in a wave. I got a part of almost all the experience flowing into our camp. I even bought Identify Block, so no one would be able to see my level. I needed to build up my strength undetected for my plan to succeed, and succeed it did. With a class not meant for actual combat, I needed to outlevel them tremendously to make up for the difference. I wasn't planning on fighting anyone, but I needed the base stats to be able to react and dodge if needed. I had backup plans and talismans from the store in case of emergencies, but I wanted to keep those in my back pocket. After Eric got crushed by the lizard in the 15th wave, I made my move. Traps activated that I had placed around camp, and I forced them to make me the leader. In the rare time everyone used their brains, they agreed to my command. After becoming the leader, I implemented some changes. After every wave, they would give me all of their points. No more spending it on useless things or on stupid skills they thought were cool. Defenses were improved and the formations for fighting were ironed out. No more fighting by yourself like some vagabond. Equipment was standardized, and warriors were forced to use a shield. Rangers had to take splitting shot, mages had to upgrade into artillery mages. Weakness would not be tolerated. I was not going to die here with these idiots, and if these people weren't going to get their shit together, I would force them. Having control over the points solidified any doubt that they had about my leadership. Jacob fought me over it mightily, saying it was his points and there was no way he was going to give them to me. Seeing no other way and the need to make an example out of someone, I used the relic. The store called it a thunderball, and it was a one-time use item that shot lightning at whatever it hit. I thought it was like a taser, a jolt to the system but otherwise non-lethal. I was wrong. After the initial shock of nearly killing a man wore off, I steeled my face and tried to work through it. People gave me looks and some were fearful of me, but there was nothing I could do about it. Trying to reassure them and apologize would ruin the facade that I had created. Fear was a decent enough motivator, and I didn't need them to like me. After this tutorial was over, I wouldn't see any of them ever again anyway. After that, Everyone ceased their petty arguments and went along with what I said. Some even had the good grace to realize I was helping them. After the evolution to F rank, my traps were becoming even more powerful. Hidden even to the bosses of the wave senses, they were so good. Long past the days of using trivial tripwires and false floors. Magic truly was a wonderful thing, weaving grand arcane tapestries of destruction. It was like the traps were notes of a musical and I was the conductor. Every explosion leading to more, building on the last. The bosses were a slog to take down and I had to use a lot of the points I earned on consumables to be able to kill it. It was a waste to spend points like that, but I couldn't afford to lose anyone else so early in the tutorial. I needed defenders to help me. Already I heard tales of people fighting each other. The months of fighting wearing down on the morals of men. Factions went to war trying to conquer other pylons in some vain sense of glory. There were tales of a man to the east conquering 4 pylons. They were blind to the true threat and wasted their strength against each other. It was all right though, I would be there to pick up the pieces. I tried to gather as much information about other factions as I could, but doing it was hard. Gone were the days of instant information. If I wanted to know what was happening, I needed to send someone there directly. That changed with Kathy though. She was a fellow student that I had known moderately well, and we got along but were never really close. She was smart and thought much the same as I had, choosing Ranger at the start and evolving it into a useful class. Beastmaster wasn't the path that I chose, but a good one nonetheless. Having her was an unexpected boon. Flyers and birds to scout the surrounding area and keep track of everything that was going on was extremely useful. Her ability to fight wasn't the greatest, but she made up for it in other areas. She could never get enough beasts to make a difference. The monsters of the wave were untamable for some reason, and we had yet to figure out why. She had a few beasts she kept for personal defense, but sending those to fight would be a waste. They would die under the onslaught of monsters, and all the effort of taming them would be lost. She could spend her days taming as many animals as she could in the forest, but they would all perish in the next wave, becoming a waste of time. That was why she stuck to mostly birds. They could evade attack by remaining in the sky while also being free to launch attacks of their own. As the monsters of the wave became more magical, she lost a few, but that was to be expected. Her ace in the hole was the giant bear that followed her around. She put more effort into that than the rest of her tames combined. It started as a level 15 thing that swiftly grew past the F rank. It would beat even me in a straight fight. The whispers that her birds carried from factions far away were worrying. Many were in ruins and more were barely hanging on. Some even turned to banditry in the woods, preying upon any they could find. The prize of points too great to ignore, valued even higher than human life. The despondent and downtrodden cared little of laws from a faraway place. There were no police to punish them, and the need for survival pushed them toward murder. It was sad to watch the human race devolve into nothing better than animals. Honestly, it happened slower than I thought it would. The most dreadful of the bunch was a marauder by the name of Craig. Or was it Greg? The birds were great, but some information didn't transfer well. He amassed a following of like-minded people and began raiding factions and cared little for the life of men. The way his followers revered him made me think of cult leaders with their undying loyalty. They had this zealous look about them and would kiss the earth he walked on. They would throw themselves into battle without care for their safety. It was unnerving. Already he took control of more factions than anyone else I had information on. The only thing that didn't make me more nervous was the distance between us. We were in the southern half of the tutorial based on the markers, and he started his campaign in the northern half. He already took over most of the northeast and was expanding in all directions. I didn't want to risk provoking him, so I kept the surveillance to a minimum. He wasn't headed in our direction, and I didn't want to change that. At least not until I had the traps to stop him. He would have to get through a few factions before nearing my borders. With Wave 21 tomorrow, I only needed to survive 9 more of these. Then I would be free. Then I could finally go home. Chapter 57 Alarm. Day 60. It had been 2 weeks since the change. 4 waves and 14 days of grueling training for everyone in camp, along with a pylon upgrade wave. Everyone came around and realized what needed to be done. At first, when I was only training for myself, I thought I would get strong enough so they wouldn't have to go through this. Now that I was looking back on it, it was sheer arrogance to think that. There was no way I could have gotten strong enough to protect my family throughout the whole tutorial. I was just glad that we changed in time. If we had waited any longer, the gap would have been too large to overcome. The pylon upgrade was useful experience to catch up. The level 25 orcs weren't that helpful to me, but to my family they were walking experience. We weren't so far behind that catching up was unfeasible, just difficult. There was a lot of complaining and rough days to be had, but everyone powered through. Evolutions started becoming common in this last wave, and now the majority of the camp was in the F rank. Fighting higher-level enemies gave a lot of experience compared to same-level enemies. Most were catching up to my level, and I was beginning to suspect that class rarity determined how much experience was needed to level up. After getting my rare class, I had only leveled up 4 times and still sat a single level away from my new skill. The changes were large and were extremely gratifying to watch. We were starting to look like an army of old with the added benefit of magic. Like Lord of the Rings made real. The rogues evolved out of close quarters, fighting with one, even becoming a poison specialist. The nasty smell was easily outclassed by the sheer impact that the poison had, turning an area into a cloudy smog that the monsters had to run through. Alchemists were having a competition to see who could make the most potent poison. Another rogue leaned more into the trap-making route and made quite the devastating traps. Our rangers got more powerful, and Carrie could now produce a substantial amount of cover fire with her skills. Hal was more of a sharpshooter and kept his skills for powerful single-target attacks that mostly targeted the boss. Rachel evolved into some sort of pyromancer, and she truly had a way with fire. Austin was the biggest surprise. After seeing that gaining a law was possible, he refused to evolve until he had one. He was going for the law of light, and it took some construction to make it easier. Information on laws wasn't that expensive to purchase, and now that I had one, the information populated the store. I thought it was stupid to only provide the information after I had obtained one, but that was the way the store worked. To aid him in gaining a law, I used my profession to build a huge structure of glass. It was more difficult than working with metal, but I wasn't making anything extremely complicated. I solicited Vinny's help, and we got it done in a few hours. The structure was essentially a giant magnifying glass. Using the curvature of the glass, we made the focal point of all the walls and roof concentrate in one spot. It took a long time for Austin to pull it off, but he only had to delay his evolution by a wave. Being capped out in experience made it so he had more time to meditate on it. He funneled all the time he would have spent hunting into trying to comprehend his law. Seeing me do it, his competitive spirit was roused, and he didn't wish to be left behind. I couldn't fault him for trying, but if it went on any longer, I was prepared to get him to stop. He needed to evolve to help me during the waves, and putting it off was making me shoulder more of the load. The family increased their contribution, but the weight only got heavier. The 18th wave was especially hard. That was the wave where every monster evolved and had the power of an F rank. It went just as badly as the first time this happened. The rank difference was too much to handle. Even with the traps Allison, the trapper, made and the poisons Connor threw out, it still ended in tragedy. We weren't able to kill them fast enough, and the monsters clawed their way through the gates. I did my best to stymie them and block as many as I could. I planted myself in the gateway and was the rock the tide broke against. Even with my extensive strength, droplets got through. Droplets in this case were monsters that wreaked havoc inside the wall. We were prepared for such a scenario to happen and had plans to mitigate the damage, but the chaos of battle still claimed a life. Another faction member, another funeral. That was what got most of the complainers to stop. The mandatory hunting trips became a little less mandatory and became desired. I didn't have to force anyone anymore. It was also the last time most of us laughed. Our wounds were deep and something that healers couldn't fix. I knew something new was coming for the 20th wave, and that there was a change afoot before the wave even started. Wave 10 doubled the difficulty increase, Wave 15 made it so 2 directions were attacked, and Wave 20 kept with tradition. As the wave started, the obvious change was easy to spot. A 3rd direction was added. In 3 directions did the monsters swarm at us. I took one gate, Austin another, and Jonathan the third. The family was strong enough to supplement our defense, but direct confrontation would be unwise. If the unfortunate were to happen, that would be one less defender for the waves to come. They sat behind the gate, ready for anything that got by me. With this many monsters, the gates just delayed the inevitable. They would get through regardless. The second change was more subtle and took a while to notice. The boss of the wave, firmly 7 levels above me at the time, had a law. All of my advantages of fighting previous bosses were nullified, and the fight was a knockdown, drag-out, brutal affair. The 7-level gap was difficult to overcome, and I wasn't certain I could have done it if I was alone. We had to use another trap to finish it off, which was unfortunate, but better than the alternative. I couldn't afford to waste time healing. As my stats continued to rise, healing took longer and longer. With more people active during the fights, it wasn't me alone that needed to be healed anymore. Meditation worked wonders, but it was beginning to take most of the day to fix me up. 2 days wasn't enough to stay ahead of the waves. I brought up my status sheet to give it a once-over for all of the changes. Name: Christopher Zelensky. Race: F. Human. Class: F. Champion of Niflheim. Rare: Level 29. Profession: G. Novice Blacksmith. Common: Level 20. Affinity: Ice. Faction: Zelensky family. Temporary: Faction head. Strength: 211. Agility: 105. Perception: 34. Fortitude: 101. Endurance: 112. Vitality: 60. Intelligence: 24. Wisdom: 41. Acumen: 26. Free points: 0. Laws: Least law of ice. Class skills: Heavy blow, uncommon. Fortified body, common. Throwing weapon proficiency, beginner. Identify, common. Frostbite, uncommon. Sweeping slash, common. Ice fortress, uncommon. Heavy armor proficiency, beginner. Heavy weapon proficiency, novice. Body of a barbarian, uncommon. Barbarian's rage, common. Hail, common. Ice manipulation, common. Meditation, common. Ice arrow, uncommon. Shatter, uncommon. Frost armor, rare. Profession skills: Sense metal, common. Create weapon, crude. Create armor, crude. Metallurgy, common. Forging proficiency, novice. Mana engraving, common. For reaching level 20 in my profession, I received a new skill. Forging proficiency seemed like the smartest to take at the time, and I already improved it to the novice tier. There were other skills I could have taken, but the boost to everything I made was better than anything else I could have taken. The beginning tier blacksmithing profession didn't have the most outstanding of capabilities. Now the next skill, that was something that I was giddy about. The price to buy it made me wince, but it was well worth it. Finally being able to dive into the magical side of things with runes and enchantments was something I was eager to do. Getting the skill also opened my eyes to the major flaw that I should have seen coming. I could now engrave, but I had no idea what to engrave. I had no runes nor enchantments that I knew, and the skill was largely useless without those. For whatever reason, that aspect of becoming a runesmith fled my mind. Buying the schematics was just another leech to my dwindling funds. Every wave I gained a massive amount, only to spend it all before the next wave. It took the adage, you have to spend money to make money, personally. The runes were expensive, and after buying the skill book for enchanting and the skill, I had to budget how much I spent on them. I was raking in the points every wave, but everything was getting more expensive. Skills cost 25,000 now and would only increase after my next purchase. I could have commandeered some of the community points, but I didn't want to do that. Taking from others to empower myself didn't sit right with me. Engraving was strange. It took such precision that I had yet to make a successful rune. I had only gotten the skill a few days ago and still hadn't had the time to delve into it too deeply. It was also what I currently found myself doing. I was surrounded by failed works and half-finished runes. The previous few days were spent drawing the rune on paper before I moved on to actually engraving. Vinny was kind enough to pound out some swords for me to practice on. They were rough around the edges, but I destroyed most of them anyway, and making quality swords would be a waste of time. I needed to practice, and ruining good swords wasn't the best idea. On the off chance I succeeded, the finished product would be useless, but that was worth it in my opinion. The rune I purchased was a least rune of durability. Runes followed the same tier system that laws did. Least, lesser, common, great, greater, master. Supposedly, there was a grandmaster rune, but that was often thought a myth. It didn't concern me and was a long way away, so I didn't care about that. Right now, engraving the worst tier was my only priority. I went with durability because that was what I would have wanted. The thought of my weapon failing me and sometimes actually failing pushed me toward it over any of the others. Centering myself for another attempt, I activated the skill. Using the skill took practice and control, which took time to master. It required a steady flow of mana through the carving tool, and any fluctuations would diminish the final product. The loops and curves were second nature to me by now, and I could probably draw it in my sleep. A curve here leading into a sinuous shape there before crossing over and entering into a swoop. Precision and experience guided my hand before it all came crashing down. The alarm went off and a loud crash was heard, causing my attention to falter and ruin the engraving. What the fuck? The wave was tomorrow and we were all taking it easy to rest up for it tonight. What could possibly be so important that the bell needed to be rung? What is it, Hal? It came out more angrily than I intended, but he answered all the same. A group of men are approaching. He yelled down from the watchtower. Okay, and? Why the alarm? I was in the middle of something and that Hal cut me off before I could finish. A hostile group, Hal said grimly. Nerves come to bear. I knew it was a possibility, but I didn't think it would be so soon. Chapter 58 Easy. Darius cursed. They were supposed to get closer to the wall before the alarm went off. They must have had a skilled ranger up in the watchtower if they were able to see them when it was this dark. Darius couldn't keep the grin off of his face as he thought of all the points and loot they would get from this camp. Their wall looked impeccable and it signified the wealth they had, ripe for the taking. This would be the fourth camp they raided, and it was looking like it would be the biggest haul. It might even let him get enough points for a new sword. Ever since his evolution to F rank, his sword wasn't keeping up with him anymore. With their cover blown, they gave up on the stealthy approach they were in the middle of and walked confidently towards the gate. This wasn't the first time they would have to blow the gate in to prove their point. Usually after breaking in, the people would give up and let them take everything of value. They saw the disparity in levels and gave in without a fight. He looked toward Frank, who responded with a nod. He had the breaching charge ready. It was a massive point investment to rig an exploding device into a charge to blow in the gates, but it was worth it in the long run. Breaking down the gates physically would take too long and wouldn't send the right message. To maybe see if they could get this over with sooner, he called out to the people inside, "Open the gates and we won't harm you." It was a lie, but they didn't need to know that. He usually kept the killing to a minimum, but sometimes examples needed to be made so the process went smoother. He could hear a slight commotion on the other side of the gate and voices started to raise in argument. He thought they might be debating on complying. Idiots. The weak-willed would never make it in this new world, and their cowardice would kill them if the monsters didn't first. Why did they deserve a camp and nice things if they weren't willing to defend it? The voices abruptly cut off when one of them shouted. It seemed that the leader had arrived and put an end to the squabbling. Darius could hear someone climbing the ladder to the watchtower before he saw a man emerge from behind the wall. He and his group, having a propensity for night raids, purchased skills to aid in night vision, which gave him the ability to see so easily in the dark. His perception also aided in low light vision. That was why he was able to see the details so clearly this late at night. The man had blonde hair that had grown out quite a bit, with a matching scruffy beard that could use a shave. The man stood at around 6 feet tall and was obviously a warrior. The fool wasn't even wearing armor. Darius could tell that he wasn't used to this by the fact he exposed most of his body as he stood watching them. A quick identify revealed his level. Human, level 29. He took a moment to look at us, squinting so he could see better before he spoke. "Who are you?" He made it sound like a statement instead of a question, and at first, it made Darius wary. It was missing the usual undertone of worry or fear. What the man said had none of that. It almost sounded like frustration and we were interrupting something. The other camps weren't like this, and this guy was giving Darius a bad feeling. Darius shook his head to center himself. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. The man wasn't even level 30. Everything would be fine. There was no way he would lose. He had evolved, and they had this guy outnumbered. All of Darius's group were easily into the 30s and had a few levels on this guy as well. Killing humans was a surprisingly great source of experience. All he had to do was threaten the guy a little and he would roll over. "Are you daft?" I said, to open the gates. "Or do you want me to do it for you?" A small threat of violence to make this go smoother. Darius nodded to Frank to give the order to blow it. Frank started to walk toward the gate and pulled out the device. Before he made it halfway, the man on the wall called out, "Halt! Don't come any closer." The order came out awkward, like this was the first time he had done this. On the inside, Darius smiled. The man was just posturing. He couldn't even give orders properly without giving away his inexperience. This was a good sign and dispelled his earlier feeling of doubt. Frank completely ignored the order and continued walking toward the gate. The rest of them readied in case the guy attacked. It wouldn't be the first time that it had happened. What they weren't ready for was the guy jumping down from the wall. What kind of idiot would do that? He separated himself from his allies while also leaving his cover, all without wearing any armor. Something whispered in Darius's mind that only the confident would do that, but it didn't get through. Seeing that the guy was unarmed and unarmored, those thoughts were dismissed. Darius was higher level. This guy was just an idiot. Frank had stopped walking after the man jumped down and looked at Darius for what to do. They hadn't encountered someone so stupid before, and he was looking for guidance on what to do. Well, if the man wanted to kill himself that badly, they would oblige him. His high level would also be a nice catch. Killing him might put Darius over the threshold for the next level. They couldn't waste a lot of time here, and looting the place would take a while. Getting back to camp took a few hours of sprinting, and there was a wave the next day. Darius didn't want to waste any more time on the fool. Maybe if they took this guy hostage, the rest would comply. He signaled the rest of the group, and they started to fan out around the guy. The fool just watched as they surrounded him. "So I take it you wish to do this the hard way," the unarmed man said, like he was taking a stroll in the park. What was this guy on about? They already had him surrounded. Did he think he was going to win? "Alan, shoot him in the leg. That should shut him up." Darius didn't like the nonchalant attitude the man had and ordered his ranger to wing him. He didn't want to kill the guy just yet, so a wounding shot to the leg was the best bet. Alan was a great ranger and had only gotten stronger over the levels. No skills were necessary to prove our point. Alan drew his bow and loosed his arrow in a blink. Before I knew it, the arrow was embedded in the man's thigh. There wasn't so much as a grunt in pain from the blow. Darius expected some screaming and crying by this point. The man just looked down at his leg and the blood dribbling down it before looking back up at them. Now it's self-defense. Ice started to coalesce around the man's body, forming armor out of thin air. Freezing snaps of the ice forming filled the quiet atmosphere, and Darius watched dumbfounded as armor froze into place. Before the armor was fully completed, the man raised his arm and launched an arrow right back the way the arrow came, right at Alan. It flew so fast through the air that Darius could barely keep up. He heard a sickening squelch and turned to see a hole through Alan's chest from the blow. Alan was caught by surprise and slowly looked down at the gaping hole in his chest before falling over dead. Alan, being a ranger, didn't have high defensive stats to begin with, and being caught off guard only made it worse. Darius had no time to react before one of his men was on the ground dying. What the hell? This guy was supposed to be weak. He's only level 29. Chris. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. I only meant to scare the guys a bit before restraining them. Not put an ice arrow through the guy's chest. I thought he would defend himself or something, or at least dodge it. Not just sit there and die. The guy made no move to use any skills or get out of the way. He just watched as my arrow went through his chest and obliterated his heart. I couldn't tell what level they were and only got question marks when I used Identify. They didn't feel that strong to me, so they must have had a way to block my skill. Identify block was available in the store, but it was a waste of points to buy, in my opinion. What was the point of blocking your level from monsters? Some of the naivety was gone now that I realized what they used it for. to fight humans. They carried themselves like two-bit thugs and spoke like sketchy gangsters. After they shot me with an arrow unprompted, I was kind of pissed, so I returned fire at the guy who shot me. I knew they were here for unscrupulous means, but come on, shooting an unarmed guy. After that, everything I did was self-defense. My mind was still rattled at what happened. I didn't mean to kill the guy. I aimed at center mass like I had done countless times before during the waves. I didn't get much longer to think about it as the rest of the men closed in. I left my hammer behind since I didn't think I would fight the guys, but it wasn't hard to make a new one. It wasn't the same as my old one, but it would get the job done. It wasn't made with the pure ice mana my old one was, and it wasn't saturated in my ice law and power for hours during its formation. As they charged me, hail and ice manipulation flared quickly to form a new hammer. A quick pulse of my law and it was ready to go. A quick and dirty weapon. It hurt my creative smithing side slightly to use such a weapon. Sparring with Austin gave me a lot of practice fighting against humans, and it was different than fighting monsters. If you weren't prepared, it could end badly. After making my hammer, I kept hail going in a large area so everyone was in its effect. I used ice manipulation to start harassing the ranged attackers so they wouldn't be able to target me. That was a trick I picked up during the waves. If the ranged attackers were busy fending off my ice attacks, they wouldn't have the time to shoot at me. My focus wasn't on killing them, just harassing them enough to take their attention off of shooting me with arrows or magic. It let me deal with the melee warriors without as much interference. Some attacks still got through, but there weren't enough for me to actually care. Since they started this course of action, and it looked like this wasn't the first time that they had done this, I didn't hold back. Heavy blow and frostbite activated with a glow, and I swung my hammer at the leading man. He went to block with his shield, but my strike powered through his block with ease. Both skills slammed into his guard and destroyed his shield. Unless something was at the common tier, I had enough strength to destroy it. The poor guy's shield clearly wasn't. The guy took the full force of my blow and got sent skipping off into the distance with a broken arm at minimum from the sound. Probably fractured a few ribs as well, but I wasn't certain. That was also when Austin lit up the area with one of his skills to see what was going on. I went alone over the wall so I could hash it out with the guys to get them to go away. The sound of fighting must have drawn his attention. I didn't think they would start attacking me. Looking back on it now, it was stupid to think that. They were here to steal from us. What did it matter about attacking me? I would have to do better in the future. It wouldn't do to have my arrogance be my undoing. I guess it was just me holding out a little hope in humanity, hope that was now gone. Austin saw what was going on and immediately joined the fray. He had matched my feat of gaining a law and also evolved into a rare class at F rank. He had the same amount of power that I did, which was more than the men we were fighting. A sword clanged off my armor before I swiftly retaliated with a blow to the head. Experience during the waves drove my actions, and mercy was not one of them. I was used to fighting the monsters, and instinct forced me to go for the kill. I grimaced as I watched his head explode. That would be a sight I wouldn't forget soon. A few more men tried to attack me before they realized it wasn't going to work. Frost armor was too much for them to go through, and any cracks quickly froze over. After seeing another one of us with this amount of power, the men made to retreat. I guess there was no love for each other because they just left half of their group behind. Of their original group of 15, 8 were dead or dying on the ground in front of me. I didn't give chase as it would just cause me to fumble around in the dark. It might have also been the shaking in my hands that forced me to stop. Men were dead by my hand. Human blood covered my armor, and I didn't know how to feel about it. I wasn't so disillusioned to think they didn't deserve it, they obviously did, but the fact I killed someone didn't feel good. It scared me a little, and I didn't know how to feel about it. I couldn't get over how easy it was. Chapter 59, Nice Talk. It was a few hours after the fight that I really came back mentally. Killing a human for the first time was a lot different than I thought it would be. The physical act wasn't what was different. Hit anything hard enough and it would die all the same, but the mental side was different. "You all right there, bud?" Austin said. I was sitting on the wall staring out into the forest when he found me. The blood was gone after some vigorous washing, and there weren't any signs of the previous battle, but my thoughts were still in turmoil. "Yeah, I'm good. Just a lot, you know?" I said back. My hands had stopped shaking and I was trying to clear my mind from replaying the events on repeat. They deserved it, he said. I know they did, but that doesn't change what I did, I answered. Knowing they deserved it did little to change the fact that 5 lives were ended by my hand. 5 people wouldn't see another sunrise. I was working through the mental gymnastics to be okay with that, and it was taking longer than anticipated. The fact I would have to do it again didn't feel good. Having this be the first of many doesn't sit well with me. I know the world isn't sunshine and rainbows. This will happen again, I said forlornly. That's dark, buddy. Why don't you try to take the emotion out of it? They have definitely killed before. Think about it like you saved someone in the future from dying. Austin said. Think about it like you saved a life. That was a generous mental leap, but not entirely wrong. They would have killed another person, and I technically prevented that from happening, probably more than once. Logically, it was a net positive. Logically wasn't emotionally, though. This was something I would have to work through, and I didn't see it being easy. Oh, I got something that'll take your mind off it. Abigail and the rest of them bought the info on Earth. You want to know what's happening? Austin said with amusement poking at my side. He knew I wanted to know but was messing with me. Oh, my dear Nightlight, please enlighten me, I said with a laugh. His face scrunched up at the nickname, but he was the one who started it. He could have just told me without the games. The planet's mass wasn't enough for some stupid standard, so it's increasing in size to accommodate while also going through heavy changes. Biomes will change rapidly due to the mana influx along with the flora and fauna. Animals will evolve and mutate rapidly and a bunch of other things. It even said that any ancient bloodlines would resurface in current descendants. What if there are dinosaurs when we get back? How cool would that be? There was a glint in his eye thinking about all the new sites to explore. He really embodied his profession. Fighting a dinosaur did not sound like a fun time. Seeing one was, but fighting one did not. How much bigger is the planet getting? It was already big, I asked. Not sure. It said every planet's different, so we weren't able to get a definitive answer. We'll only know once it's finished, he said. He spoke about it a little more, and my mind was thoroughly stimulated thinking about it all. We were told to expect nature to reclaim most of civilization and animals to dominate the land when we returned. Animals fared better with the sudden influx of mana and essence than humans could, so that was why they were left behind. The 10 levels in H rank were the system preparing the human body for mana. If we were stuck on Earth to deal with the massive change so abruptly, most would die. Mana poisoning, I think they called it. Beasts had bodies that were better adapted to the change and would enter a period of massive growth and evolution. Mating and hunting on a scale never seen before. The information even said to expect a massive increase in the population of the animals found on the planet. The animals also had an event of their own while we were here in the tutorial. While we could purchase things from the store for points, they fought over treasures dropped throughout the world. Natural treasures that would strengthen a bloodline or a nicely curated space of the perfect mana type. It would be a massive game of King of the Hill for all the beasts involved. Bloodlines were another thing that was new in this magical world. Every animal carried with them a bloodline of their species, and to evolve to higher grades, they had to either purify it or evolve it. Evolving a bloodline made me think of a snake evolving into a dragon, which made me chuckle thinking about it. Humans were slightly different. They could also carry with them different bloodlines inherited from their ancestors, but they could also take others. They were a sort of clean slate in terms of bloodlines. An Arctic fox could never assimilate a hellhound's bloodline because they were so different and it would result in death. A human, on the other hand, could assimilate either. There were limitations to the ability and you could only have one, but it was still cool to think about. What about a wolf bloodline making you a pseudo-werewolf? Austin said excitedly. We had been talking about all the possibilities. What about a dragon bloodline? That would be cool, I said, throwing out my idea. Finding out dragons were real shouldn't have been that surprising, but it was cool to think about. Sitting here throwing out increasingly crazy ideas was nice. It took my mind off of what happened and got me to think about something completely different. I would have to thank Austin somehow later for doing this for me. You think you'll ever get strong enough to make your own? Austin asked. After learning bloodlines were a thing, someone bought an info missive about them. There were 3 ways to get a bloodline: inherit it from your parents, assimilate it from an outside source, or forge your own. Forging your own took a tremendous amount of power and rare resources we wouldn't see anytime soon. I don't know, I'll certainly try, I answered. Who wouldn't want to forge their own bloodline? To create something that was uniquely yours that you could pass on to your kids. It was a nice goal to think about. It sucks that no one in the family had a bloodline, Austin muttered. In the missive, it said that if you had a bloodline, it would show up on the status screen, and the lack of it meant you didn't have one. I didn't expect to have a bloodline due to the rarity we were told they appeared, but it would have been a cool bonus. The lack of my own left me open to the possibilities of assimilating one. I wanted to go all in on the winter aesthetic I was pushing, and a polar type of bloodline would be cool. Cool. Changing a bloodline after assimilating it was possible, but extremely dangerous. It was a painful process that carried with it the risk of death. It all depended on how closely you grew to your current bloodline. If you had it for less than a year and didn't like it, the process wasn't that bad. If you had it for years and fought through multiple ranks with it, the process was near suicide. Did you hear what rank Earth was going to be? I asked him. The ranks of planets were the same as classes. It went from G all the way to S. The rank was an evaluation of the amount of essence along with mana purity and density on a planet. Both of those were decided by the planetary core. It was possible to raise the grade of a planet, but it was vehemently expensive. I hadn't heard what our planet was going to end up as, and I was curious what we were going to return to. Most newly integrated worlds were on the lower end, in the G to C rank. I don't know. I think it's still being decided, Austin answered. Our conversation wound down after that, and we sat in a comfortable silence. Thanks, man. I needed that. There were no more thoughts about earlier, and I calmed down from before. Anytime, buddy. The notifications from earlier were still there, and I finally looked at them. You have slain human, level 31, 987 points earned. You have slain human, level 31,235 points earned. You have slain human, level 31, 3,378 points earned. You have slain human, level 32, 2,212 points earned. You have slain human, level 35, 5,123 points earned. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Skills available. The most points I had ever received along with a level. I knew what the notifications were going to say since I felt the level being applied and saw how many points I now had. It was most of the reason I was so distraught. It was single-handedly the most profitable fight I had been in along with the most experience. It was disturbing. I tried not to think about it and what it meant for the future. Many would jump at the chance of quick experience and points. Reaching level 30 brought along with it the first skill of my new class, and it did not disappoint. There weren't many options, but it was easy to pick out the one I wanted. Momentum of the Avalanche, rare. The longer you are in battle, the more powerful you become. Percentage boost to physical attributes the longer you are in battle, capping at 100% after 2 hours. It was the perfect skill for the prolonged fighting that I was doing. It was an insane boost that would double my physical might. It would take a long time to get going though. Divided out over the 2 hours made it less than a percentage per minute. It would be meaningless in a quick fight. Fighting the would-be bandits took less than 5 minutes and would barely boost my stats by anything by the time the fight was over. Sustained fighting over a long period of time was where this skill shined, and it was perfect for the waves. The other skills on the list were pretty good and made me glad I picked it. The choice I didn't take before was they're called Frozen Arsenal. It did what Frost Armor did but for weapons. Frozen Fortitude was a close second, but I would get it next time. Frozen Fortitude, uncommon. Inhabitants of Niflheim are known for their strength of arms and body. Frozen Fortitude forces them to go hand in hand. Every second point in strength results in a point in fortitude. The skill was similar to Body of a Barbarian, and did the same thing but for fortitude. The skill also came with fine print saying that it wouldn't stack with any similar skills. It would only go off of my base strength, not the bonus I got from Body of a Barbarian. It was disappointing but understandable. It would get out of hand if it didn't work like that. I did wonder about the limit of such skills. There was no way that I could have 9 of them for every stat. That would be silly. There had to be drawbacks to them. Maybe it was the reason I leveled so slowly. I would have to buy some information about them to better understand the drawbacks because there wasn't any I could see. From the wording and the boosts it provided, it seemed like it was free stat points without anything to pay for them, which I knew wasn't how the system worked. We had spent enough time with it to know that everything had a price and nothing was free. Figuring that out was for later though. Right now I marveled at my new skill and I was excited to test it out on the waves tomorrow. With the talk and the distraction of dinosaurs and a new skill, my mind was firmly past the unpleasantness of earlier, at least for now. Chapter 60 Things to Come. As the waves increased in strength, we had to adjust our strategy to fight them. There were too many foes to continue what we had been doing. In the past, Austin and I would blunt the wave by fighting in front of the wall so the monsters never had time to build up and damage the wall. It was all in the effort of not letting them accrue damage on the wall, letting them through. The wall was the bulwark that people needed for safety. It was what kept the fighting somewhat organized and orderly. No one wanted a repeat of the 4th wave where boars ran amok through our lines and we were beset from all sides. To keep the injuries and casualties to a minimum, we needed to limit the angles of approach. We could just stay huddled behind the wall and only use ranged attacks, but that had many faults. 1, it was slow. It gave the beasts a lot of time to scratch and claw at the gates, doing a not insignificant amount of damage. With enough of them, they would make it through. With the increasing numbers, that was untenable. 2, it didn't empower the warriors enough. There was no challenge, no threat that pushed you further. I equated it to the heat of battle. Fighting in the thick of it was like forging a weapon. The fires of battle where emotions ran hot was when a warrior was made. I tried to get people to do as I had done, throw themselves into the crucible, but they didn't have the spark. They didn't have the spirit for battle that I seemed to have. Every new wave brought with it an undertone of excitement for me that others didn't have. The feeling of a challenge, of a worthy foe. It was almost euphoric if taken out of context. There were enough outside forces acting on me that the feeling never had time to take root for long. The waves brought worry and loss that drowned out any other feeling. I couldn't get excited about a battle if I knew another family member wouldn't survive it. It was cruel. To take something that I was beginning to enjoy and taint it with the worry about my family. It was most of the reason why I fought alone. I knew that others couldn't handle the same weight that I could. When the wave started to come from 2 directions, Austin and I split. It also gave rise to the rest of the family and broke them out of their shell. The beliefs that they held onto were shattered. The false notion of safety that the defenses and structures provided was broken. They knew that they couldn't continue as they had. Some lost hope, which was unfortunate, but some rose to the occasion. Hal, Carrie, Rachel, and Jonathan were the main ones. Others followed suit after the changes I implemented. Connor and Allison, for example, with his poisons and her traps. With the change of wave 20, 3 directions would now be assaulted every wave. It didn't take a genius to conclude that it would soon be every direction. Every new direction split our forces further. There were only 25 of us left after Jack died, and stretched 3 ways was 8 aside with 1 left over. Jack fell during the 18th wave. I couldn't bring myself to care all that much. He wasn't family for long, and I wasn't overly familiar with him. I couldn't afford the distraction right now. Sounded harsh, but that didn't make it true. Jack was a good man and deserved better than what happened. He died in battle, and at least it was honorable. Alice was devastated that her boyfriend died, but I could tell that most others felt the way I did. It was a tragedy, but not one that overly concerned us. I felt the loss the most during the subsequent waves. We had 1 less warrior at our disposal, and it made all that much harder. 8 people to a side was not a lot. When all 4 directions were assaulted, it would be even less. 6 and change if our numbers held. Our group composition was getting worse as well. The 5 deaths were predominantly warriors. Mark, Grandad, and Jack were all warriors. Derek had been a rogue and Kyle a ranger. The group composition was now 9 warriors, 3 rogues, 2 rangers, 4 healers, and 7 mages. that looked fine on paper, but when split out it left 3 warriors aside. One of the rogues evolved into a decent frontline warrior, but they would never have the durability of a full-blown warrior. They got tired faster in the long, drawn-out fights and weren't able to handle the constant fighting. Their archetype was more suited for fast and quick battles. Another rogue, Allison, went a trapper route which left her near useless in a fight. She could still hold her own and had the skills to help, but it wasn't where she was most useful. That wasn't even considering that not everyone was a fighter. After the changes I implemented, they could do it, but some were adamant about their professions. Connor and his poisons came to mind, along with Vinny with forging. They spent most of their free time working on their professions, and they were getting damn good at it. Some of the poisons Connor made were downright nasty. Anywhere else it would probably be a war crime. Vinny was an even better blacksmith than me. He leaned into that side of his build and bought many books about the subject. Getting around to reading them is something I had yet to do. I knew I would when I pushed to evolve my profession, but I had been too busy and my attention was needed elsewhere. Over half were what I would consider fighters and focused mostly on combat. It was a necessity that couldn't be ignored. The only reason the rest weren't forced into it was because what they made was useful. If not for that, I would have been a bit more demanding of them. For now, though, their efforts were better spent on what they were doing. Whatever points we saved not having to buy what they made was more points spent on other things to protect us. Split as we were, we had to make do with what we had. There wasn't enough firepower per side to stop them from reaching the walls, and trying to was futile. It all came back to the same problem as the 10th wave. A controlled release of the pressure was the best solution rather than fighting the inevitable. Sure, we could probably fight it out for a few waves without resorting to opening the gates, but that created bad habits. Opening the gates gave me the most control of the fight. I planted myself in the opening and killed as many as I could. Austin did the same on his side, and Jonathan the third. With the 3 of us stemming the tide, it led to a kill box of sorts. Someone floated the idea of putting the traps inside the walls, and it proved effective. They would still kill outside of the walls and would find victims either way, but the difference was it was before they faced me. I killed or wounded more than half that made it through the gate, and it made more sense statistically to concentrate our efforts on the ones who got through, rather than the ones who had yet to. With the limited number of traps that we could make in the time between waves, they were most effective after getting through. It was the same in every other direction as well. Austin had a better kill rate than me at the beginning of the waves on his side, but he wasn't able to sustain it over the entire wave. I caught up before the wave was over. Jonathan had the hardest time. His class and skills were perfect in delaying the monster's entry, but they weren't overly suited for killing as many as possible. We remedied that by placing Carrie on his side. While he held them off and penned them against his skills and stone walls, Carrie's attacks were most effective. Her arrow rain did a lot to make up for where Jonathan was lacking. Hal was on boss duty. He could only shoot his full-powered arrows a handful of times, and they were best used to delay the boss. He would make sure the boss was thoroughly distracted while we took care of the wave. Fighting them both at the same time was suicide. Once the wave was manageable for the others, we left to take on the boss. The we I spoke of were the more powerful of the family. Me, Austin, Jonathan, Hal, and Rachel. Carrie's skills weren't suited for the boss fight, which left her in charge of the forces who stayed behind. A party composition of 5 of our best. Jonathan was the dedicated tank, which left Austin and me free to attack. There were times where we had to tank, but mostly it was Jonathan. With experience, he proved a reliable tank. His class even came with some crowd control skills and taunting skills that worked to keep the boss's attention. Hal and Rachel were left to combo their most powerful attacks freely. The boss rarely got through Jonathan, but if it did, it didn't get past me. That left the 2 to build up substantial damage. As the bosses got stronger, our party had to change slightly. After the last wave, they started having laws of their own, and Jonathan's power waned. He didn't have a law of his own to defend against it. He only recently achieved his law, and it was only after facing a formidable badger-like creature. It used earth laws to become near indestructible, which Jonathan was able to gain inspiration from. Without them, he would have died to the next boss. Finding the creature deep in the forest was an incredible boon, but it was also a dire warning. If we lost our camp and were forced to travel the area, we would now have to deal with monsters with laws. The beasts in the forest weren't the low-level easy monsters they once were. I felt bad for any who had to make the wilderness their home. For the wave coming at noon, I prepared myself for what was to come. I would stand in the gate and do my best to not let any by me. My father and Vinny were the warriors stationed behind me. Having my dad be the recipient of any that got by me pushed me to do my utmost. Alice was on my side as well with another mage to help. Diana was a water mage and was middling in power. She had to be broken out of her funk, which left her behind most of the others. I had another mage behind me, but he wasn't what I considered a fighter. Connor was a great many things, but a fighter he was not. Austin's brother didn't carry the same skills as Austin himself. The two weren't very close, and their age gap was a big factor in that. Austin was the same age as me, 24, and Connor was just 18. When Austin was in high school, Connor was just getting out of elementary school. Austin moved out before they became close. He was a nerd through and through, and he focused on chemistry. That was what made him such a good alchemist. He had the base knowledge of chemistry without the preconceptions of a more experienced scientist. He didn't have to unlearn most of what he had been taught. A high school level of chemistry translated decently well to fantasy alchemy. He had to learn a lot through the store, but he was diligent. Watching him make poisons that could kill a city from before was an experience. I had watched the kid grow up, and now he was making foul poisons. His class was mostly left to the wayside for his alchemist profession, but he still did what he could. Most of his time was spent on the setup of the wave by poisoning all the traps that Allison made. Professions were different than classes and weren't suited for combat in a way that seemed intended. I could certainly swing a blacksmith's hammer around to fight off beasts, but it felt like the skills of a profession were designed to be unusable in combat. Sense metal would be a good skill to locate hidden daggers if it could be used like that. But sadly, it didn't. It felt like there was a line separating my skills, so they couldn't be used in such a way. There had to be some way to push the boundaries, but we hadn't found one yet. My thoughts cleared from the memories of the past and focused on preparing for the coming wave. Meditation was great to clear my head before the battle. My hammer was in my lap, going over the previous battles and what I needed to do differently. The sun was reaching its apex, and it would soon be time. I donned my armor and strode to my gate, my anchor against the waves. Come hell or high water, I would do my best.